$50,000. Seriously, $40,000 wasn't enough for you guys. Okay. Last time on Everything You Need to Know, we talked about $40,000 sailboats, and we found that you could get a C&C 40 in any color that you wanted, or a very well-equipped cruising boat with tons of miles on it, or sort of an entry-level production-style boat like the Hunter 32 that we saw last week. But this time, we're stepping up our game a little bit. We're opening up the taps on another 10 grand and setting the limit a little bit higher. But with the price increase, our expectations need to increase as well. This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about $50,000 sailboats. And yes, this is the one with Morgan in it. Now, for 50 grand, we're going to have some simple expectations, I would think. So far in this series, we've been okay with like a racer cruiser that meets the bare essentials that we need to survive on a boat for maybe a whole summer or some lighter cruising. 35 to 45 feet from the late 70s or 80s, that's been enough to get us by on that 40 grand or less. But for 50 grand, I'm going to need a little bit more. I'm going to need something that will handle the Great Lakes where I sail right now, but also be able to get all the way from New York to Grenada without losing any sleep. It'll have to have room for me and a lady friend to live comfortably on board, with solid sleeping arrangements for the two people, preferably an aft cabin in that regard, and then some sort of guest bed, most likely in the V-berth, as well as a galley that we can actually cook in. We're also going to need a head with a shower big enough to fit my elbows in there, as well as a cockpit I can be comfortable in on those 16-hour days that, when you're cruising, you're going to have a lot of. I also want a decent rig and a fairly good sail plan. And finally, for 50 grand, I don't want to be hauling the dinghy up on deck if I don't have to, and I'd like some room for solar panels if the need arises. That would be a big plus. Maybe room for a water maker if it's in the budget later on. Now, my expectations for 50 grand may not seem all that fancy, and I know I'm going to be getting an older boat from the 80s or the 90s, but I want it to be in reasonably good shape and need sort of minimal financial attention before I can take it out cruising. And now that we're getting up to 50 grand, the first sale listing will need to have a little bit of a pizzazz to it. Now, I don't need whole video series on the boat, and I don't need drone shots of the boat sailing. At the very least, I would hope that the broker would tidy up the boat a little bit and take some pictures that actually give me an idea of the layout of the boat, the space in the boat, the whole feel of the boat. Just stop taking pictures like this one, or this one, or this one. Here's an ad, for example, that's actually very well done for the $50,000 price point, and it's a really nice boat to boot. There are two of these Hunter Legends in this price point right now, and damn, I love a legend. Now, we know Hunter is the face of pure evil for some of the people in the comments, and I think, my opinion, there are a couple of reasons for that, and bear with me on my mini rant I'm about to have for just like 1 second. Hunter was at the forefront of the change we underwent to this more production style of boat, sort of in the 80s and 90s, and traditionalists hate change. That's the number one reason right there. A full-on teak Batcave interior, lighted by no more than 2 incandescent bulbs, no brighter than candles, was all we had, by darn it, and it was good enough for us. Second reason, for the same price, Hunter would give you everything you couldn't afford in the before times, like an aft cabin, a walk-through transom. You'd get 2 heads with 2 showers. People despised Hunter owners because of all their fancy schmancy stuff that they got for their money. And last reason, and this one is actually a real thing, there have been some, on the Hunter front, some quality issues on some of the models, and I think a lot of that owes itself to being a higher production run boat. When you make a lot of them, you do tend to do it more quickly, and some things do tend to go wrong. Now, these 2 sailboats I'm talking about, they aren't your neighbor's floating Hunter condos down the dock. These 2 are Hunter Legends, and the Legend series is Hunter's go-fast variant of boat, and while they share hulls with their more luxurious sister boats, These bad girls get racier rigs, none of that B&R stuff. They get inboard jib tracks, full-on adjustable backstays, things like that. The Legends are just fast sailboats, full stop. But they didn't give up much of the interior to get there, which is really interesting. You still get the aft cabin that you'd expect for 50 grand. You get huge space inside and out, massive galleys and reasonably good heads. You get all the luxury in a solid go fast platform. For 50 grand with the expectations we have, you really would be hard pressed to beat these boats, these Legends. If you wanted something, say, a little tougher though, maybe a little heavier, a little beefier, 50 grand is where we start to see the first appearance of a boat that a lot of you have been asking for, the Morgan. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make this whole channel possible. I want to give a big shout out to this week's newest patrons. We've got Captain Jimbo. Thank you, Captain Jimbo. Also, we've got Keith and Ido. Thank you guys so much for joining the team. So back to Morgan. Charlie Morgan was a sailboat racer. He was born in 1929, and he founded Morgan Yachts right out of high school. And while he made a few models, none were so famous as the Morgan 41, which was aimed squarely at making money off the charter industry. So it was a cruising boat made by a racer. But with the success of the 41, he made a shoal version because that was sort of in demand. Same boat, a little bit shorter, and that was the Morgan Out Island 41, which is supposed to be the most popular boat over 40 feet ever built, apparently. And you can see why. The goal with the Out Island 41 is space and ease of use and simplicity, which are staples for a good cruising boat. Now, these are a center cockpit, which gives them sort of an unusual look, and add to that many of them are ketch-rigged, which might turn off a few people, but this thing checks off a lot of the boxes for an aspiring cruiser. You get the comfort and safety of the center cockpit, which, if you add a full enclosure, is absolutely unbeatable. You also get a big, heavy, full keel that only needs 4 feet of water, so if the Florida Keys or the Bahamas is the target destination, this may be the perfect boat for you. All the weight to handle the Gulf Stream just about any time, and the sail plan to do it quickly, and the depth to anchor anywhere you want when you get there. Now, in the Out Island, you do get an aft cabin, which is sort of roomy. You get a hallway with room for a workbench. You get a V-berth for your guests, and you get enough space in the galley to cook. You even get an actual engine room, which is leaps and bounds nicer to have than any of the aft cockpit variants of boats we're going to be looking at when it comes to oil changes and maintenance. Now, I know the Out Island 41 gets a lot of love from its owners. They rave about how capable these boats are, and you really can't take away from that fact. A 4-foot draft on a 30,000-pound boat is truly some blue water truth. A lot of people can't get past the look of them, however. Like anything, I guess they're just not for everybody. Now, I can get past the look of the exterior, but for all of the Out Islands I see in sort of the $50,000 market right now, I haven't found one that I actually like. I know I get my aft cabin and I get my dinghy davits and huge tankage for cruising, but I don't get a boat that I actually like, a boat that gives me that nice place to be feeling. And maybe I just haven't seen a really nice one yet. The next thing we see pop up in this price point is Gulfstar. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They're around a little bit. It was a boat that was made in Florida from 1970 to 1990, and while they made a lot of power boats too, you will find Gulfstar sailboats sort of all over the place. They do tend to be the heavier sort of go-anywhere type of cruiser. And these boats are tempting in this price point when you look at all the interior space and room to move around. Some even have 2 heads, which is nice when you have guests over. The broker even took the time on this one to tidy it up a bit and stage the boat for some good pictures, which I also like. The problem with Gulfstar isn't space or accommodation or even how they sail. They're not bad. The problem is they have a fairly bad reputation for how they were built. While the guy who founded the company certainly knew what he was doing, the people building them didn't always. There's horror stories popping up all over the place about delamination, hardware that isn't bedded or sealed properly, bad fiberglass practices with radiuses and tabbing, and things just being done to the lowest possible price point. Now, I've been on 2 Gulfstars, and I honestly I liked both of them. They give you tons of space and the feel of an almost island packet, honestly. They seem that good, but I haven't owned one. And while a few people do seem happy with them, there are way too many people that simply do not. Now, we wouldn't have a boat shopping list without a solid racer cruiser showing up. And when we hit 50 grand, we start to see the Irwins. This is another Florida boat company making boats all the way from 1966 to 1992. Ted Irwin was a competitive sailboat racer that just wanted to make heavy cruising boats. Here's a great example of an Irwin Citation 40-footer. That's fast enough to get you where you're going, and it has the interior space to keep you comfortable doing it. Irwin's known to make a solid, well-made yacht with the full intention of Caribbean cruising. That was the point. That's why they made this thing. These Irwins are just beautiful, well-made boats that have stood the test of time and miles, and I can't count how many of them I've seen bombing around the Great Lakes, the East Coast, and down in the islands. This one with the full enclosure is up here on the Great Lakes, and it's definitely something worth looking at, though it does seem a little bit overpriced for what it is. The only real downside to this Irwin Citation is the lack of sort of a dedicated bedroom for the couple to sleep in. You do get a V-berth, but sort of barely, and you get a rear quarter berth that isn't an aft cabin. It's actually called a captain's berth or a sea berth. I'd bet a couple would probably end up sleeping in the middle on the drop table. Now, I'm going to get some flack for this, but in this list of $50,000 boats, I personally would be very hard to talk out of looking at a First or an Oceanis, because they're starting to show up now. And yes, those are both Beneteaus. I know some people don't like them, but we got to check them out. Here's a small one, and by small, it's an Oceanis 39, so it's not actually that small. But don't let the waterline fool you. This is a roomy and very capable boat. You get the fin keel with the bulb arrangement, which means good performance, reasonable upwind, but a shallow draft. And where I'm headed, that matters. You get the sugar scoop to make loading supplies easier, and room for dinghy davits and solar panels. You get door aids and skylights that give you that airy, roomy cabin that I would really value in my next boat. I lived on a typical racer cruiser, and being in that cave inside, it kind of sucks. You get the V-berth for the guests, a comfortable salon or saloon, depending on where you're from, for hanging out and entertaining. You get a nav station and a big head with a real door. A galley for days that actually gives you enough room to cook or make drinks while you're entertaining in your nice roomy cabin. And a reasonable aft cabin to crash in after said drinks. Also, just look at how clean this thing is. Great pictures, there's sound deadening in the engine bay, there's a dinghy. What more could you ask for? Okay, I didn't expect the $50,000 sailboat video to run this long, and we still haven't talked about these pilot houseboats or Whitby or a bunch of other cruisers, so sorry, I'm gonna have to break this one into two parts, guys. We're just scratching the surface of what 50 grand will get you. If you like this channel, please don't hesitate to subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. I will see you guys in the next one.